My name is Paul Vallone. You are listening to 106.7 Wilmington's Big Talker. I'd like to welcome you to Guns, Politics, and Freedom, where each Sunday at 5 p.m. as part of the Sunday Night Political Power Block, we give you the ammunition to better defend your gun rights. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at hyattguns.com. In case you aren't familiar with me, I direct Grassroots North Carolina, or GRNC, since 1994, our state's most effective gun rights organization. As its director, I was involved in drafting and passing our original concealed handgun law. Since then, GRNC has gone on to engineer passage of concealed handgun reciprocity, our purchase permit bypass, castle doctrine and stand your ground, the expansion of concealed carry into state and municipal parks, restaurants, public assemblies, educational properties, and much more. Grassroots North Carolina is exactly what the name implies, a grassroots collection of volunteers from all walks of life who share a common concern that our constitutionally guaranteed freedoms are being eroded. Check us out at grnc.org. That's grnc.org. First, let me wish you a happy Indigenous Peoples Day. Oh, you didn't know? Tomorrow is October 14th, the second Monday in October, and my iPhone tells me it is Indigenous Peoples Day. Now, you might think of tomorrow as Columbus Day, but if you do, you're a racist. Because after all, Christopher Columbus was not the discoverer of the New World, sailing to the Americas in 1492. No, he was the slaughterer of the Native Americans. Wait, how can they be Native Americans if there wasn't an America yet? But I digress. Just yesterday, the Smithsonian Museum published a lovely piece entitled Indigenous Peoples Day, Rethinking How We Celebrate American History. Of course, this they published on their site for the National Museum of the American Indian. Wait, we all know that calling the indigenous people Indians was all a big mistake, and nobody called it America until we did, so how can they be American Indians? But I digress. According to USA Today, Maine and New Mexico changed the name in April, and Vermont followed suit in May. Minnesota made the change in 2016, followed by Alaska in 2017, and, ready now, North Carolina in 2018. Bet you didn't know that. South Carolina has been celebrating Native Americans Day since 1990. So who knew that in 2018 the good Governor Roy Cooper, who has never met a leftist cause he would not espouse, nor an American tradition he would not crap on, declared the second Monday in October to be Indigenous Peoples Day. But given that Columbus Day was originally proclaimed to be not only a celebration of that faithful voyage in 1492, but also of Italian heritage, I, as a native Italian, hereby proclaim that this co-opting of my holiday, the holiday of my ancestry, is racist. You might be forgiven for thinking that the Obama administration history, given that history, you were free of former Attorney General Eric Holder of Fast and Furious gun smuggling fame. Unfortunately, you would be wrong. Not only is Eric Holder back with a vengeance, but he has North Carolina in his sights as, and I quote, ground zero. That's right, leftist Obama Attorney General Eric Holder is out to mold politics in your state to serve his leftist agenda. More on that later. We will also discuss the left-wingers on the Winston-Salem, North Carolina City Council and their plans to eradicate Southern heritage, particularly with respect to the Dixie Classic Fair. In fact, at the fair, which ends today, Winston-Salem seems to be doing its best to recreate the tragedy at California's Gilroy Garlic Festival. And finally, we will discuss the potentially groundbreaking Second Amendment case the U.S. Supreme Court has finally decided to consider. But first, this just in gun rights news. In what one socialist told me is the progressive paradise of San Francisco, it seems there has been some backpedaling on their resolution and request to have you, as an NRA member, designated a terrorist, a domestic terrorist to be exact. From previous shows, you may remember that I guess it would be Amy or Amy or Ami or whatever she called herself. She was a leftist from San Francisco who repeatedly trolled our Facebook page to oppose conservative Dan Bishop in the special congressional elections for a state she doesn't even live in. California telling you how to live yet again. Well, bad news, Amy or Ami or whatever you are. Republican Dan Bishop won. In fact, Republicans won both special elections last month. So much for the Democrat bellwether that was supposed to predict Democrat victories in 2020. But I digress. You may recall that the San Francisco Board of Supervisors passed a resolution declaring the NRA a domestic terrorist organization, which included restricting any entity from doing business with this domestic terrorist organization. And as we discussed, this was not just some wacky lefty stunt. They really mean it. If given sufficient power, you as gun owners would face revocation of your rights, likely in some sort of red flag preemptive action. But it seems that San Francisco was perhaps a bit mature. I love it when leftists get overconfident because it reveals to the world what they are really scheming to do. You might also recall that the NRA sued San Francisco, arguing that the resolution violates its constitutional rights to free speech and free association, as well as seeking to impose censorship. Unchecked, San Francisco's measure would have a chilling effect on the organization and its members, said the NRA. It asks the court to step in to, quote, instruct elected officials that freedom of speech means you cannot silence or punish those with whom you disagree. You think? Well, apparently the leftists have blinked, and that instruction has been given as the mayor of San Francisco and its city attorney issued a memo reminding the Board of Supervisors that the resolution has no teeth, saying that no city, quote, department will take steps to restrict any contractor from doing business with the NRA or to restrict city contracting opportunities for any business that has a relationship with the NRA, according to the NRA press release. For its own part, the NRA says the lawsuit will continue. Speaking of attempts by the left to shut down the civil rights organization known as the NRA, you only thought the Russian collusion hoax was over. According to the Washington Times, Federal Election Commission Chairwoman Ellen Weintraub wants to start an investigation of the NRA to see if they are illegally using Russian campaign money. The source of the report on supposed NRA Russian collusion is, wait for it, Fusion GPS. Sound familiar? You remember them, the same ones that put together the phony report on Donald Trump, which led to the Russian collusion hoax, which apparently still won't die. Oh, and we should note that Weintraub, who is almost certainly a Democrat, cites as her credible evidence, her credible source, rather, on which to base her intended probe, a news report from McClatchy News Service, because we all know how credible 21st century media are, right? But the Jackal Pack trying to bring down the NRA isn't done yet. Our good friend John Richardson, blogging at No Lawyers, Only Guns and Money, you can find that at onlygunsandmoney.com. That's onlygunsandmoney.com. He says the following. The Democrats on the Senate Finance Committee issued a staff report in September calling on the IRS to investigate the NRA over a trip to Russia. They want the IRS to pull the NRA's 501c4 tax designation. The Senate Finance Committee minority members even called the NRA a foreign asset. Yesterday, Senate Finance Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley fired back in a letter to IRS Commissioner Charles Rettig. He characterized the Democrats' efforts to get the IRS to investigate the NRA as a partisan request. You think? He said that the IRS is not a political weapon and should not be used as such. What a novel thought. The IRS is not a political weapon. Apparently, Bill Clinton didn't get that memo when his administration reportedly audited conservative organizations such as the NRA and the Christian Coalition. Or apparently, Barack Obama didn't get the memo when Lois Lerner began withholding tax-exempt status for conservative organizations. One election away, folks. Nothing from the left is honest, and they have demonstrated over and over again that they will stop at nothing to consolidate power. and the power is over you. If we fail in the 2020 elections, this is the type of abuse of power you can expect to be levied at conservatives everywhere in the United States. Again, check out John Richardson's blog, No Lawyers, Only Guns and Money, at onlygunsandmoney.com. In a moment, we'll take a short break, after which we will return with attempts by the leftists who occupy the city of Winston-Salem to eradicate Southern heritage and create another tragedy like California's Gilroy Garlic Festival at the once great Dixie Classic Fair. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. After a short break, we will return with still more information better enabling you to defend your gun rights. My name is Paul Vallone. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at HyattGuns.com. Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. So says Democratic presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke, who goes on to say, quote, "We're not going to allow it to be used against our fellow Americans anymore." Notice that is your AR-15 which is being used against fellow Americans. And as I'm sure you are all aware, all the Democrat presidential candidates are now in full-throated roar over bans on semi-automatic firearms. Well, Mr. Hell Yes, we're going to take your AR-15. The 2018 FBI crime stats are out, and they have some interesting things to say about that epidemic of gun violence we hear about so often in the media. For starters, overall violent crime is down by 3.3% for 2017, but it gets better. How about this one? More than twice as many people were beaten to death with hands, fists, and feet, 672 to be exact, than were killed by rifles of any kind. That's 297. And that includes bolt action, lever action, all rifles, not just those nasty old assault weapons we hear are such a threat. How about this one? 5 times as many people, 1,515, were stabbed, cut, or maimed to death by a knife or other cutting instrument as the 297 killed by rifles of any kind. 5 times as many killed by stabbing. And yes, gun homicides in general are down too. In 2018, an estimated 10,256 slayings involved firearms, down from 10,982 posted by the FBI during the previous year. That is 736 fewer gun homicides. Obviously, any death is one too many. But the next time one of your progressive coworkers starts talking about that epidemic of gun violence, feel free to say, what epidemic? What is it about Winston-Salem? I think it must be the tobacco money guilt among the limousine liberals, because every time something comes up in Winston-Salem, the city government breaks hard left. For example, the leftists controlling the city council in Winston-Salem have long tried to ban guns wherever they can, whether they can do so legally or not. After GRNC shepherded passage of concealed carry in parks, we had to sue the city to get them to comply with state law and remove signs prohibiting concealed carry in their parks. Now, in an apparent effort to recreate the tragedy of the Gilroy Garlic Festival in California, where there was a mass shooting at a gun-free zone, Winston-Salem at its Dixie Classic Fair is illegally prohibiting not only concealed carry permit holders, but even armed off-duty law enforcement officers. Given the porous security in place at the fair, the resulting victim disarmament zone only serves to attract criminals and violent sociopaths. If the worst happens, rest assured that the leftists of the Winston-Salem City Council and Mayor Allen Joines will undoubtedly call for restrictions on your right to keep and bear arms. Predictably, one Facebook page even describes an individual who went to the fair against his own better judgment, leaving his gun in his car only to return and find his firearm firearm stolen from his vehicle, something gun control advocates will undoubtedly blame on the gun owner. The city falsely justifies its action by claiming that state law allows it to prohibit guns on city property, while neatly avoiding the fact that statewide firearm preemption only allows cities to ban guns, quote, on local government buildings and their appurtenant premises, not an entire fairground. Ironically, the Winston-Salem City Council is already under fire for voting to rename the Dixie Classic Fair in 2020, which represents, of course, yet another leftist attempt to eradicate Southern heritage in the name of political correctness. So my recommendation to you is to avoid, and I realize the Dixie Classic Fair is over this year, but my recommendation is to avoid the Dixie Classic Fair next year, or whatever leftist name they give it, starting next year, but also that you avoid spending money in Winston-Salem altogether for as long as the city continues its illegal effort to restrict lawful concealed carry. Now for some good news. The next session of the Supreme Court just opened, and here from the Heritage Foundation is an overview of a significant Second Amendment case coming to the court. Quote, "The Supreme Court has not heard a significant case involving the Second Amendment since its landmark rulings in 2008 in District of Columbia versus Heller and 2010 in McDonald versus City of Chicago. In these cases, the court recognized that the Second Amendment protects an individual right to keep and bear arms rather than a collective right enjoyed only by state militias, and that this right applies against the states as well as the federal government. The justices left for another day issues such as the standard of review courts should apply in reviewing regulations that infringe this newly protected right, the types of firearms, ammunition, and magazines the government may ban, and to what extent this right extends beyond the home. In the past decade, the Supreme Court has turned away several courses raising these and other issues surrounding the Second Amendment, often over the protest of one or more of the justices. Last year, Justice Thomas chastised his colleagues for treating the Second Amendment like a, quote, constitutional orphan, end quote, and disfavored right, pointing to the vast number of First and Fourth Amendment cases the court has heard since it last reviewed a case dealing with the Second Amendment. Thus, the Supreme Court's review of a Second Amendment case is a long time coming. New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus City of New York involves a challenge to New York City's ban on transporting licensed handguns anywhere within city limits except to a gun range. Under the city's regulations, residents must obtain a special premises license, which allows them to possess a handgun in their home and transport it to or from one of 7 gun ranges in the city. The regulations forbid transporting handguns to any other location, such as a gun range beyond city limits or a second home or even a new home if the resident moves. Members of a local shooting group challenged these restrictions, arguing that they flunk any level of constitutional scrutiny, burden the fundamental right to travel, and violate the Commerce Clause by controlling economic activity beyond the city's borders. The U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York ruled for the city, finding the regulations are reasonably related to the city's legitimate interests in public safety and crime prevention. Yeah, right. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit affirmed, noting that the regulations, quote, impose at most trivial limitations on residents' ability to lawfully possess firearms for self-defense. At the Supreme Court, the challengers contend that the city's regulations, which are among the most restrictive in the country, treat the possession of a handgun as a, quote, privilege granted as a matter of municipal grace, rather than as a constitutionally protected right. They argue that text, history, and tradition establish that the right to keep and bear arms is not confined to the home. The city, which defended its regulations as reasonable because citizens could borrow or rent handguns if they wish to frequent gun ranges outside the city or purchase another handgun if they have a second home, has sought to prevent the Supreme Court from hearing the case. After the court granted review, the city amended its regulations effective July 21, 2019, to allow residents with a premises license to transport their handguns to another residence within or outside the city and to gun ranges outside the city. This came after 6 years of litigation in which the city defended the old gun regime. The city now claims the case is moot and asked the court to rule on its motion to dismiss the case. The challengers responded in a letter to the court that they welcome the opportunity to address why they believe the case is not moot. As of this writing, the court has denied the city's request for an extension to file its brief, but has not ruled on the city's suggestion of mootness. While it is not clear what the court will do, it is readily apparent that the city is trying to prevent the court, with its pro-Second Amendment majority, from resolving the case on its merits. So basically, the city tried to render this moot by changing the regulation and removing a few of the restrictions, few of the draconian restrictions, I should note. Good luck with that. Anyways, right now we're going to take a short break. After that, we will return with, remember Attorney General Eric Holder? Yeah, Fast and Furious? Yeah. Eric Holder plans to use North Carolina as an example in his plan to control political districting, to ensure a leftist death grip on power everywhere. In the next segment, we will describe what Eric Holder has in mind for you. Right now, you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. After our short break, we will return with still more critical information enabling you to better defend your gun rights. My name is Paul Vallone. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at HyattGuns.com. In a moment, we will discuss Eric Holder's plans for permanently installing leftists into positions of power right here in North Carolina, all part of his nationwide effort to increase leftist power. But since we discussed so-called assault weapons in the previous segment, I thought you might want to hear some excellent C-SPAN audio of testimony before Congress by Amy Swearer, a senior policy analyst for the Heritage Foundation. You can find it on YouTube by searching for the Heritage Foundation. Here it is.
Chairman Nadler, Ranking Member Collins, and distinguished members of Congress. My name is Amy Swearer, and I am the senior legal policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation's Ed Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies. Just as doctors can only recommend an effective treatment plan if they first form a correct diagnosis based on accurate assessment of the symptoms, policy analysts and policy makers must have an accurate understanding of the societal problems they are seeking to combat. Unfortunately, too many policymakers appear completely uninformed about basic factual realities related to guns and gun violence. Don't misunderstand me. We all want safer communities. But the characteristics distinguishing so-called assault weapons from non-assault weapons are not factors like caliber, lethality, or rate of fire. Proposals to ban scary-looking features like barrel shrouds or pistol grips are, for all intents and purposes, proposals to force law-abiding citizens to own guns that are harder for them to handle, harder to fire accurately, and more likely to cause them injuries, even when they are being used for lawful purposes. Moreover, semi-automatic rifles are not a meaningful driving factor behind rates of gun violence. 2/3 of gun deaths in this country are suicides, where the type of firearm is essentially irrelevant. With respect to gun crimes, over 90% are committed with handguns. Rifles of any kind are definitively used in only 3 to 4% of gun homicides every year, and an American citizen is 4 times as likely to be stabbed to death than they are to be shot to death with a rifle of any kind. Despite frequent claims that semi-automatic rifles are the weapon of choice for mass public shooters, in the last decade, over half of these shootings have been carried out with handguns alone. On the other hand, semi-automatic rifles like the AR-15 are so well suited for defensive action against threats in a civilian context that the Department of Homeland Security quite literally designates them as personal defense weapons for law enforcement officers. It is little wonder, then, that millions of law-abiding citizens in this country also choose these types of semi-automatic rifles as their own personal defense weapons. Far from needing to be protected from these rifles, law-abiding Americans benefit when they are allowed to defend themselves with them, particularly in situations where they are outnumbered. Just last week, a homeowner in Rockdale County, Georgia, relied on his scary-looking semi-automatic assault weapon to defend himself against 3 masked teens armed with at least 1 handgun who tried to rob him and other residents in their own front yard. Ironically, the rifle deemed an assault weapon by many in this room was used defensively to protect innocent people against assault, while the perpetrators used a non-assault weapon offensively to commit actual assault. Importantly, some of the most famous examples of the defensive use of assault weapons by civilians come from scenarios where the government has been either unable or unwilling to defend entire communities from large-scale civil unrest. During the 1992 LA riots, for example, law enforcement was nowhere to be found as hundreds of looters ransacked Koreatown. Ordinary store owners like Richard Ree and his employees took it upon themselves to defend their livelihoods from lawlessness, using, in many cases, semi-automatic rifles. Similar stories emerged during the civil unrest in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014. And there are some here today who still genuinely don't understand why or how anyone would need such scary-looking rifles for purposes other than mass murder. And so I have permission from my mother to explain it to you by partially embarrassing her. My mother did not grow up with firearms, and they will never be her favorite thing in the world. In fact, she'd never handled a firearm until I took her to the range for the first time several years ago. Now, I love my mother, but like every other novice with a handgun, she was quite bad. I mean, she struggled to hit a stationary target from 6 yards out under ideal conditions. And then she picked up an AR-15. And I watched my mother put a fist-sized grouping of lead in the center mass of a target from 20 yards out. That is why law-abiding citizens buy millions of these firearms. When accuracy and stopping power matter, they are simply better. Americans use firearms to defend themselves between 500,000 and 2 million times every year. God forbid that my mother is ever faced with a scenario where she has to stop a threat to her life. But if she is, I hope politicians protected by professional armed security didn't strip her of the right to use the firearm she can handle most competently. Frankly, I hope she has in her hands the scariest looking assault weapon she can find, so that we can both be confident in her ability to end the threat. Thank you.
Eric Holder. I don't know about you, but that conjures traumatic memories of his days as Attorney General under Barack Obama, when his Department of Injustice actually engaged in smuggling so-called assault weapons into Mexico, all while claiming we needed to ban such guns because they were being used in crimes in Mexico. Of course, it all came crashing down when Border Patrol agent Brian Terry was killed by Mexican smugglers using one of the guns Holder smuggled into Mexico. You may also recall that Congress held Holder in contempt for refusing to cooperate in the resulting congressional investigation, no doubt to protect his boss, Barack Obama. So you figured you were rid of Holder when Obama left office. Well, bad news. He's back. You might also recall that Republicans took control of both chambers of the legislature in 2010, giving them the power to redraw political districts. However, at least 3 times the left has sued over the districts they drew, and courts controlled by Obama and Clinton judicial appointees have repeatedly thrown out the districts, often just before elections, causing Republicans to redraw them yet again. Now, understand that political gerrymandering, the drawing of political districts by the party in control to retain control, has been a practice in American politics for as long as our country has existed. Indeed, it was shrewd drawing of political districts right here in North Carolina which allowed the Blues to retain control of an essentially red state for more than a generation. But of course, in certain camps, political gerrymandering is only acceptable if it is used to favor Democrats. And why should you care about this arcane political issue? The answer is, I guess you don't have to, at least if you don't mind losing your right to keep and bear arms. Because the reality is that political districts determine who gets elected, and more importantly, who controls the legislative bodies that pass gun laws. Until 2018, Republicans held supermajorities in both chambers of the North Carolina legislature as well as both chambers of Congress. At a state level, the result was that we defeated all attempts to pass gun control, but also that we passed in 2011, 2013, and 2015, we passed 3 major omnibus pro-gun bills. Meanwhile, Congress saw no significant attempts to pass gun control since 2013 when we defeated so-called universal background checks. But what does Eric Holder have to do with all of this? Well, you might know that Republicans have had problems over the last several years drawing districts, but you might not know that Holder is behind much of it. You see, Holder runs the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, and now it is largely the National Democratic Redistricting Committee which is behind those lawsuits. Said First in Freedom Daily, quote, North Carolina is ground zero for a new National Democratic Party push to win state legislative seats around the country between now and the 2020 census, former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder and Governor Roy Cooper said Saturday. Former President Barack Obama tapped Holder last year to head the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, which will pump millions of dollars into state house elections between now and the 2021 redraws. Now, the good news is that in June, the United States Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision written by conservatives, ruled that partisan gerrymandering is a political issue and therefore not for consideration by federal courts. So, all's good, right? Wrong. When federal courts threw out the gerrymandering suit, the leftists refiled in state court, knowing full well that thanks to a Democratic super PAC in the 2018 elections, Democrats took control of the North Carolina Supreme Court. Predictably, in early September, a 3-judge panel in the state court threw out Republican-drawn districts, yet again saying they were too partisan. Republican Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger, knowing that Democrats control the North Carolina Supreme Court, read the tea leaves and chose not to appeal, saying, and I quote, Eric Holder's sue till blue endgame is a Democratic legislative majority created by Democratic judges. Anybody who doubts that Holder's support for fair maps is a phony front to help Democrats just needs to answer one question. How many blue states has Holder sued? Bob, we aren't done yet. Just 2 weeks ago, Holder and Obama struck again, this time with a suit against North Carolina's 13 congressional districts in the same court that ruled for them last time. Says the New York Times, such suits normally require months and even years of litigation, but the plaintiffs are seeking to build on the 3-judge panel's unanimous ruling on September 3rd that partisan gerrymanders of state legislative districts violated the state constitution's guarantee of free elections. Bottom line, folks, get politically active and above all, vote. The alternative is loss of your freedoms, starting with your right to keep and bear arms. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker. We're going to take a short break, after which we will return with still more critical information that are enabling you to defend your gun rights. My name is Paul Vallone. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at HyattGuns.com. A new phrase has entered the political lexicon which was unknown before Donald Trump took office: the deep state. Supposedly, the phrase originally referred to Turkey, but was appropriated by Steve Bannon and Breitbart News to describe the career Washington bureaucrats who man various agencies and oppose all efforts to reform the system, to drain the swamp, as Donald Trump puts it. But the deep state is all a wacky conspiracy theory, right? At least that's what we're constantly told by the media. We're all just a bunch of right-wing conspiracy nuts. The problem, and this is a quote, the problem in Washington is not a deep state. The problem is a shallow man, an untruthful, vain, vindictive, alarmingly erratic president, or so rationalized New Yorker editor David Remnick back in 2017. So imagine my surprise when just this week a leftist New York Times columnist and author of a book entitled, appropriately enough, The Deep State, finally admitted that the deep state does in fact exist. But you see, according to New York Times columnist James B. Stewart, the deep state is a good thing. Or so he said in an interview with NBC's Today Show. When asked what he discovered relative to Donald Trump's claim that a deep state exists and is trying to undermine his presidency, Stewart replied, quote, "Well, you see these characters in my book, and the fact is, in a sense, he's right. There is a deep state. There is a bureaucracy in our country who has pledged to respect the Constitution, respect the rule of law." He goes on to say, what Donald Trump calls the deep state of the United States is protecting the American people and protecting the Constitution. It's a positive thing in this sense, he added. Now, I want you to think for a moment about what Stewart just said, namely, that there is a core bureaucracy of people you didn't elect, who don't answer to you or any other voter, who actively undermine a duly elected president whom you elected, and this is a good thing. But that's not all of it. Now consider that Stewart's mindset is actually that of the left in general. You don't know what's best for you. You are a simpleton, a despicable, who couldn't possibly be trusted to elect someone to lead the country, and as such, the left has to protect you from yourself. Because after all, only they know what's best for you. That, folks, is a dictatorship. They might try to depict it as a benign dictatorship, but it is a dictatorship nonetheless. Furthermore, it is symptomatic of exactly what the left is trying to do under Donald Trump, to usurp the power of an elected office, taking it for themselves, because after all, they are so much better suited to do it than you are, you the unwashed. I have been saying for some time now that I believe civil war is imminent, that this type of elitist thinking is the precursor to that conflict. But now I want you to hear from someone who believes that civil war is already underway, whether or not the shooting has started. A friend sent me this, and it's credited to Dr. Jack DeVere Minzy, who was an emeritus professor at Eastern Michigan University and who died on April 8th of 2018. However, it appears he did not write the piece, which was actually delivered at a South Carolina Tea Party convention in 2018. Frankly, I don't care who wrote it because it is spot on. It's entitled Civil War: How Do Civil Wars Happen? Here it is. Two or more sides disagree on who runs the country, and they can't settle the question through elections because they don't even agree that elections are how you decide who's in charge. That's the basic issue here. Who decides who runs the country? When you hate each other but accept the election results, you have a country. When you stop accepting election results, you have a countdown to a civil war. My analysis, the Mueller investigation, was about removing President Trump from office and overturning the results of an election. We all know that. But it's not the first time they've done this. The first time a Republican president was elected this century, they said he really didn't win. The Supreme Court gave him the election, they said. There's a pattern here. What do sure odds of the Democrats rejecting the next Republican president really mean? It means they don't accept the results of any election that they don't win. It means they don't believe that transfers of power in this country are determined by elections. That's civil war. There's no shooting, at least not unless you count the attempt to kill a bunch of Republicans at a charity baseball game practice. But the Democrats have rejected our system of government. This isn't dissent. It's not disagreement. You can hate the other party. You can think they're the worst thing that ever happened to our country. But then you work harder to win the next election. When you consistently reject the results of elections that you didn't win, what you want is a dictatorship. Your very own dictatorship. The legitimate exercise of power in this country, according to Democrats, is its own. Whenever Republicans exercise power, it's inherently illegitimate. The Democrats lost Congress. They lost the White House. So what did they do? They began trying to run the country through federal judges and bureaucrats. Every time that a federal judge issues an order saying that the President of the United States can't scratch his own back without his say-so, that's the Civil War. Our system of government is based on the Constitution, but that's not the system that runs this country. The Democrats' system is that any part of government that it runs gets total and unlimited power over the country. If the Democrats were in the White House, then the president can do anything, and I mean anything. He can have his own amnesty for illegal aliens. He can fine you for not having health insurance. He can use the IRS as his own police force and imprison citizens who speak against him. He can provide guns and money, Fast and Furious, Iran nuclear deal, to other countries to support his own agenda and watch while one of America's ambassadors is dragged through the streets and murdered by doing nothing to aid our citizens. His power is unlimited. He's a dictator. But when Republicans get into the White House, suddenly the president can't do anything. He isn't even allowed to undo the illegal alien amnesty that his predecessor illegally invented. A Democrat in the White House has discretion to completely decide every aspect of immigration policy. A Republican doesn't even have the discretion to reverse him. That's how the game is played. That's how our country is run. Sad but true, although the left hasn't yet won that particular fight. When a Democrat is in the White House, states aren't allowed to enforce immigration law. But when a Republican is in the White House, states can create their own immigration laws. Under Obama, a state wasn't allowed to go to the bathroom without asking permission. But under Trump, Jerry Brown can go around saying that California is an independent republic and can sign treaties with other countries. The Constitution has something to say about that. Whether it's federal or state, executive, legislative, or judiciary, the left moves power around to run the country. If it controls an institution, then that institution is suddenly the supreme power in the land. That is what I call a moving dictatorship. Donald Trump has caused the shadow government to come out of hiding. Professional government is a guild, like medieval guilds. You can't serve in it if you're not a member. If you haven't been indoctrinated into its arcane rituals, if you aren't in the club, and Trump isn't in the club, he brought in a bunch of people who aren't in the club with him. Now we're seeing what the pros do when amateurs try to walk in on them. They spy on them, they investigate them, and they send them to jail. They use the tools of power to bring them down. That's not a free country. It's not a free country when FBI agents who support Hillary take out an insurance policy against Trump winning the election. It's not a free country when Obama officials engage in massive unmasking of the opposition. It's not a free country when the media responds to the other guy winning by trying to ban the conservative media that supported him from social media. It's not a free country when all of the above collude together to overturn an election because the guy who wasn't supposed to win did. Have no doubt, we're in a civil war between a conservative volunteer government and a leftist Democrat professional government. My name is Paul Vallone. You have been listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com, where each Sunday at 5 p.m. as part of the Sunday Night Political Power Block, we give you the ammunition to better defend your right to keep and bear arms. Please check out our sponsor, Hiett Guns, America's largest gun shop, at HiettGuns.com. I also encourage you to check out my website at gunspoliticsandfreedom.com. Spell out the and, gunspoliticsandfreedom.com, where you can find my writings and earlier editions of the show. See you next Sunday.